AITA for walking out of the Christmas party after she dared me to dump her in front of everyone. I was in my future in-laws' living room on Christmas Day, covered in grease after working on the suspension of my Challenger, when my fiancé looked me straight in the eye and said, "I'll be over you in a week." But here's the thing. I had been planning my exit for months. And what she didn't know was that every insult she threw at me that night was just digging a deeper hole for herself, because I had proof of everything. My name is Elliot, and I am 32 years old. I am a heavy equipment mechanic. I box 3 times a week, and I have been restoring a 1973 Dodge Challenger since I was 25. And yes, that car was about to save me in ways you can't imagine. Danielle and I had been together for 3 years, engaged for 8 months. If you had asked me 2 years ago, I would have told you she was the love of my life because back then, she was funny, ambitious, and made me want to be a better man. My mom adored her, my friends liked her, and I truly believed we were building something real. But at some point, between choosing the invitations and signing quotes with vendors, she started changing into someone I no longer recognized. Watching it happen slowly over 6 months hurt more than I wanted to admit. We had agreed to split all the wedding costs 50-50. It seemed fair since we both worked full-time. But every bill or deposit for the venue, the caterer, and the photographer ended up on my credit card because Danielle never had the money available. Even with a decent salary as a marketing manager, she lived like she was earning double. Always with perfect nails, new clothes, and weekend brunches at places where avocado toast costs $18. But when it came to paying her share of the wedding expenses, suddenly, she was broke. And if I couldn't advance the money, she would pay me back the next month. That next month never came. And every time I brought it up, she turned it into a personal attack, telling me I was cheap or that I didn't really love her if I was counting pennies. After months of this, I started to feel crazy, like maybe I was the problem. My best friend, Omar, whom I've known since high school and who documents everything like he's preparing for the apocalypse, started keeping detailed records after I mentioned for the 3rd time that Danielle had bailed on a payment. And by November, he had calculated that I had fronted about $11,000 in wedding costs that were supposed to be shared. On top of that, I was still paying for 2/3 of our dates. He took screenshots of everything, saved email chains, photographed receipts, and organized it all into color-coded folders. I used to joke that he was paranoid, but that habit was about to save my future. The red flags became clearer in October when Danielle started getting secretive with her phone, angling the screen away and taking calls in another room. After 3 years together, you notice when behavior changes. I mentioned it to Omar over a beer, and he calmly suggested I start keeping my own records. Every expense, every conversation about money, every promise she made, just in case things went south. I did that for 8 straight weeks leading up to Christmas, documenting everything while acting normal on the surface. The invitation for Christmas dinner arrived in mid-December. Danielle insisted I be there because her mother wanted to discuss wedding details. I said, of course. I finished my shift early and spent 2 hours changing the Challenger's front suspension because the old parts were shot. I cleaned up and went to her parents' house around 3 p.m. The second I walked in, I knew something was wrong. The house looked perfect. A Christmas tree with expensive, matching ornaments, mulled wine on the stove, holiday music playing, and gifts piled high. But the people felt cold. Her mother barely looked at me. Her father gave me a weird, tense smile. Her sister, Priya, was tapping away on her phone, and Danielle was glued to her screen with a little smirk, typing as if she were live tweeting her own ambush. We sat down for a painfully awkward dinner for 20 minutes. Everything was aggressively normal. We passed dishes, chatted about Christmas shopping. Her father asked me about my work, but you could feel the tension building. Then Priya brought up honeymoon destinations, and Danielle's entire posture switched to attack mode. She launched into a speech about how I wasn't pulling my weight financially, how I preferred that stupid car over our future, how she was tired of being with someone ambitionless who spent every free hour in a garage covered in motor oil. Her family just nodded along as if they had been briefed beforehand, like I had walked into a play where everyone knew their lines but me. Then Danielle stood up, raised her wine glass as if for a toast, and said she was done with a man with no drive, that she didn't need someone who lived in a garage. And then, she dropped the bomb. There were men who really knew what they wanted in life. Men like Gavin. Priya's face went white. Her father's fork clattered onto his plate. Her mother just stared into her wine, and I realized her mom had known about the affair. But Priya and her father were hearing this for the first time, just like me. But Danielle wasn't finished. She ripped off the engagement ring I had worked months of overtime for and threw it at me with such force that it bounced off my chest and hit the floor with a metallic clink. She declared it was cheap, just like everything else I did. Then she delivered what was supposed to be the final blow. She looked me right in the eye and said, "I'll be over you in a week. I'm practically over you already." On Christmas Day, in front of her family, she had just destroyed our 3-year relationship and announced she'd been cheating on me with some guy named Gavin. The craziest part is, I had suspected something, but I wasn't sure until that very moment. I stood up slowly, and for 5 seconds, fury washed over me. Then, a strange calm took over, because she had just done exactly what Omar and I had secretly anticipated, exploding in front of witnesses and handing me everything I needed. I bent down, picked up the ring, took the spare key to my apartment that she had out of my pocket, and placed it on the table. I looked at her father and said, "Thank you for having me. I'm sorry it has to end this way." Then I walked out while Danielle started screaming something I couldn't hear. I sat in my pickup truck for 10 seconds and sent a text. "Omar, it's done." She blew everything up. Launching the protocol now. I drove to his place as my phone exploded with messages from Danielle that, over the course of 15 minutes, went from anger to confusion and then to panic. Omar opened the door, took one look at my face, and said, "She really did it." I just nodded as he grabbed his laptop, because we both knew what came next. You see, I'd spent 8 weeks preparing for this exact moment. Not because I wanted it to end, but because I had started to recognize the financial manipulation and emotional gaslighting that Omar had helped me document. Every time I brought up the unbalanced expenses, she would attack my character, and after months of it, I felt like I was losing my mind. Omar had convinced me to save everything. Screenshots, bank statements, emails, audio recordings. Just as a precaution, in case things imploded and I needed proof. That night, sitting in Omar's apartment as he opened meticulously organized folders of evidence, I felt a strange sense of calm, because for the first time in months, I wasn't confused. I wasn't second-guessing myself. I could see the whole pattern in black and white, and I knew exactly what was coming. The morning after Christmas, I woke up on Omar's couch to 20 missed calls from Danielle and about 50 messages that had started as apologies at midnight, turned into accusations by 3 a.m., and devolved into incoherent ramblings by dawn. The first thing I did was change all the locks on my apartment, since she'd had that spare key for 6 months. Omar was already up, sitting at his kitchen table with his laptop and 3 highlighters lined up like surgical instruments. He looked up with grim satisfaction and said we had everything we needed to dismantle her narrative. The plan was straightforward but meticulous. Block Danielle everywhere, update my emergency contacts at work and for my insurance to remove her, systematically start canceling with the wedding vendors, and most critically, conduct a full financial audit of every dollar I had spent that should have been split 50-50. Omar had created a detailed spreadsheet separating every wedding expense by vendor, date, amount, and who the contractual contact for payment was. Seeing 3 years of imbalance laid out like that was truly shocking. I had been paying as we went, not realizing how one-sided it had all become. The venue deposit alone, for $1,500, entirely from my account. The caterer, $3,200. The photographer, $500. Plus probably 15 smaller expenses adding up to well beyond my fair share. I started making calls that afternoon. And here is a useful thing most people don't know. Many wedding vendors have reasonable cancellation policies if you're outside a certain time frame. And since our wedding was scheduled for early June and it was December, I was in the refund zone. The venue refunded $3,000 of the $4,500. The caterer refunded $2,400 of the $3,200. The photographer kept the deposit, as stipulated in the contract. In total, I recovered about $4,350. Then, 2 weeks after Christmas, just when I thought the refund process was over, the venue coordinator called with an embarrassed tone. Apparently, Danielle had contacted them claiming I had stolen her identity to cancel, that she had never agreed to it, and they had frozen my refund pending an investigation. I just sat there staring at my phone, realizing she was actively sabotaging my ability to get back the money I had paid. That's when I understood. This was not a clean break. This was war. Omar came over in 20 minutes. We spent 3 hours documenting that all payments had come from my accounts with my signatures, including the emails proving I was the sole person communicating with them. We went to the venue the next morning, presented all the evidence, and they unfroze the refund within an hour. But that whole episode showed me one thing. Danielle wasn't moving on. She was burning every bridge on her way out. The engagement ring was trickier, as custom jewelry is non-refundable. But I had worked with the jeweler, Noah, years before, and he bought it back from me for 60% of its value, adding another sum to my pocket. As Omar and I analyzed our shared expenses with near-forensic rigor, we discovered that Danielle had racked up $1,247 in costs that should have been shared, situations where she had committed to paying half, but never did. The engagement party where she insisted on expensive wines, the venue scouting weekend where she booked a premium room without consulting me, and other occasions where she made costly decisions and then developed amnesia about paying me back. Omar suggested small claims court. I hesitated because part of me just wanted to be done with it. But then I remembered her blocking the venue refund and realized she wouldn't let things end quietly. We built what Omar called the Bible of evidence. Bank statements, screenshots of texts with promises to pay, ignored Venmo requests, a detailed expense spreadsheet, all organized with tabs and an index. The fee to file the claim was $35, and the hearing was set for early March. Meanwhile, Danielle's behavior escalated from annoying to genuinely concerning. The repentant Christmas messages vanished by the 27th, replaced by accusations that I had humiliated her. By New Year's, she was sending long texts explaining how I had ruined her life, how her family was disappointed, that her sister wasn't speaking to her, and that it was all somehow my fault for not fighting for our relationship after she announced her infidelity. She called from different numbers after I blocked her. She showed up at my gym twice until the staff banned her. She drove past my apartment so often that my neighbor mentioned her car. She tried to come to my workplace under the pretext of dropping something off. I documented everything: screenshots, call logs, dates and times of her appearances, witness statements. After the 5th incident, I called the non-emergency police line to inquire about creating an official harassment file. The officer was helpful, said my documentation was solid, and that if the behavior worsened, I'd have enough grounds for a restraining order. In mid-January, Omar came over with something big. While doing some online sleuthing on her social media, he discovered that Danielle's affair with Gavin wasn't recent. It had been going on for 8 months, basically since we got engaged in April. Worse, he found credit card statements showing hotel rooms and weekend trips she had claimed were work conferences or girls' weekends, all charged to the joint wedding expense account. She was funding her affair with the money meant to build our future. When Omar showed me the highlighted expenses, I felt sick to my stomach. There was Napa in May, which she had called a marketing conference, a beach hotel in August, supposedly for a bachelorette party, a downtown hotel in September that she had justified as a late dinner with a client, all on the wedding card. I just sat there staring at the charges, and that was the closest I came to completely losing my cool. The financial manipulation was one thing, but this felt like calculated betrayal on a whole other level. Omar asked if I was okay, and for a minute, I couldn't answer. Then I spent 4 hours in my garage changing the brake lines on the Challenger because I needed something with clear steps and measurable progress. By midnight, I was cold and focused again, but something had changed. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was going to make sure there were consequences, all the way to the end. Gavin turned out to be a mid-level sales manager, married with 2 kids, with no intention of leaving his wife, despite whatever he might have promised Danielle. Omar found Gavin's wife's public Facebook profile, showing a normal suburban family with soccer games and birthday parties. And judging by Danielle's increasingly erratic social media posts, you could see she was starting to realize that Gavin had just been using her and was never going to leave his home. She had blown up her entire life for a guy who had been lying from the start. And watching that realization dawn on her through rage-filled posts about how men are trash was almost satisfying in a dark way. It was around this time that my relationship with Sabrina developed into something more. She had worked at the auto parts store for years. We had had dozens of casual conversations, but it was just friendly shop talk. One day, While I was picking up seat brackets, she mentioned she was restoring a 1969 Camaro SS. We talked for 45 minutes about suspension geometry and brake conversions, and I realized I was having my first genuinely relaxed conversation in months without calculating who owed what or wondering if I was being manipulated. We got coffee, and I talked nonstop for 45 minutes about vendor contracts and court prep. I probably ruined any chance of a second date, but Sabrina said she'd been through a messy breakup where her ex tried to claim he had paid for things she had funded herself. So she got it. She was direct, calm, knowledgeable, paid for her own coffee, and being around her felt like the exact opposite of the exhausting chaos that was Danielle. We started meeting up at car shows. Later, she helped me install the seats in the Challenger. And while neither of us was rushing things, I recognized that this was what something healthy felt like. Someone who showed up when they said they would, paid their share, and didn't need drama to feel alive. Somehow, Danielle found out, and that is when things got truly out of hand. There is an indoor go-kart track, Velocity Track, that our friend group goes to every month. One Friday in late January, we were there for a birthday when Danielle showed up uninvited, clearly under the influence, bursting into the lobby and screaming that I had been unfaithful to her and ruined her life. She pointed at Sabrina, calling her names I won't repeat, telling everyone I was seeing her behind Danielle's back, completely rewriting history. Sabrina looked confused, having only known me for 2 weeks. I was about to try to de-escalate the situation when Danielle grabbed someone's helmet and threw it against the wall with such force that the visor cracked. The manager called the police. They gave her an official warning for trespassing and banned her for life, and I added it all to the Bible of evidence. My phone buzzed with more messages that night, but I just took screenshots and went back to talking about carburetors with Sabrina, while Danielle's life fell apart somewhere far from my concerns. The small claims court date fell on a Tuesday morning in early March, one of those gray, late winter days where you can see your breath in the parking lot. I arrived 45 minutes early with Omar, who was carrying a briefcase worthy of a corporate lawyer, even though we were only there for a little over $1,200. Danielle arrived 10 minutes late, dressed in her job interview suit, with dark circles under her eyes that her makeup couldn't hide, carrying only a purse but zero documentation. When our case was called, she kept trying to make eye contact as if that could change the outcome. The judge was a woman in her 60s, probably, who looked like she had seen every possible variation of domestic drama and had no patience for nonsense. She started by asking Danielle if she had any evidence to contradict my claim for reimbursement of shared expenses she had agreed to split. Danielle launched into a rambling story about the relationship being complicated and me always earning more, so it wasn't fair to expect an equal contribution when I knew she was struggling, completely ignoring that she lived beyond her means and that these struggles didn't stop her from getting her nails done every week or dining at expensive restaurants. The judge cut her off mid-sentence with a look of profound boredom and asked if she had any bank statements, text messages, or receipts proving she had paid her share. When Danielle admitted she hadn't brought any evidence because she didn't think she'd need documentation for something so obviously unfair, I saw the judge's expression shift from neutral to completely exasperated. Omar and I presented the Bible of evidence. About 40 pages organized with tabs, highlights, and a probably excessive index. But Omar doesn't do things by halves. The judge flipped through the binder for maybe 3 minutes, nodding occasionally, then looked up and delivered her judgment. Danielle owed me $1,325, the original amount plus court fees, payable within 30 days under threat of wage garnishment. Danielle's face went pale. She started to stand up to object, but the judge just said, "Next case." And that was it. 3 months of drama resolved in an 8-minute hearing. We walked out into the gray morning. Omar did a little fist pump. I mostly just felt tired and ready to stop thinking about Danielle and actually move on, rather than just surviving her chaos. I genuinely thought that would be the end of it, that losing in court would make her realize she needed to move on. But apparently, for some people, humiliation is a catalyst, not an end. The next 3 weeks were relatively quiet in a way that felt ominous, like the calm before a storm that you know is coming but can't see yet. She paid the debt in 2 installments just before the deadline. Her social media went completely silent. Mutual friends said she had moved back in with her parents, and I started to relax, thinking maybe it was really over. Sabrina and I were spending more time together, working on the Challenger's seats, which I had bought with the refund money. Things were feeling genuinely good for the first time in years, like I was building something real instead of just surviving someone else's chaos. Then came the night of March 20th, which I remember precisely because it was the first truly mild night of early spring. That magical night when winter finally breaks. Sabrina and I had decided to work late in my garage, door open, installing the new upholstery we had spent weeks picking out. It was around 10:30 p.m., and we were debating the routing of the seatbelts when I heard a car pull up very abruptly outside. A slight screech of tires. And before I could process what was happening, Danielle stumbled into my garage. She was in pajamas and a heavy coat, holding what was clearly a bottle of wine, so intoxicated she could barely walk straight. And she immediately started screaming at a volume that probably woke up half my neighborhood. She unleashed her rage, saying I had destroyed her entire life, turned her family against her, poisoned all her friends, and made everyone think she was the villain when all she had done was fallen for someone else. That Gavin had blocked her, and his wife had threatened her with legal action, and she had lost him because of me, somehow. That she had lost her security deposit because her landlord found out about the go-karting incident. And somehow, in her mind, all of this destruction was my fault because I wasn't man enough to forgive her mistakes and fight for what we had. Sabrina was just standing there, holding a wrench, with a completely bewildered look on her face. I pulled out my phone to call 911, calmly explaining that my ex-fiancé had trespassed on my property, was clearly intoxicated, and I needed a police presence. Danielle kept screaming that she deserved better, that Sabrina was just some uninteresting fling who wasn't worth what we had, that I should have fought for our relationship instead of giving up so easily, totally oblivious to the irony, after she had thrown a ring in my face at Christmas and announced her 8-month affair to her family. The police arrived in 8 minutes that felt like hours as Danielle staggered around my garage, getting dangerously close to the Challenger, which started to worry me about potential damage. The responding officers handled the situation perfectly. They ordered Danielle to step outside in a tone that left no room for argument. They gave her a sobriety test on my sidewalk, which she failed spectacularly. They ran her information through the system and found all the previous reports for harassment, plus the go-karting incident. Then they arrested her for trespassing, public intoxication, and violating the terms of the previous warning. She kept screaming my name as they put her in the back of the police car, her hands cuffed behind her back, saying I was going to regret this, that she would never let me forget her, that I had ruined 2 lives, and a whole stream of other incoherent, delusional things that probably didn't help her case. Then they drove away, lights flashing, and the street fell silent again, with only the sound of crickets and distant highway traffic. Sabrina looked at me, half worried, half unsettled, and asked if this happened often. I told her no. This was it, the grand finale, the final breakdown I had sort of been expecting for weeks. We went back inside and finished bolting in the passenger seat while I gave her the ultra-condensed version of the last 4 months. We took the Challenger for a drive around midnight, cruising down empty streets with the windows down, the engine rumbling with that deep muscle car sound that never gets old. And I realized Danielle had been wrong about pretty much everything, but especially about one thing. She had said she would be over me in a week, that she was practically over me already, in her parents' living room at Christmas with that smug smirk, as if she had already won. But here we were, almost 3 months later, and she was the one who couldn't let go, who had destroyed her own life trying to prove a point that didn't even make sense, who had traded something stable for something fleeting, and then blamed everyone else when it all fell apart. I never forgot her either, but not in the way she had meant it as a threat. I remembered her as a lesson in red flags, in financial boundaries, and in the importance of having friends like Omar who document everything and tell you the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. The Challenger rode like a dream with its new seats. Really comfortable. Sabrina and I went for breakfast at a 24-hour diner and talked about upgrading the brake system. And somewhere across town, Danielle was having to face the consequences of her own choices, which honestly had nothing to do with me anymore. She wanted to be unforgettable. She wanted to be the one who walked away with her head held high to find something better. But instead, she had become the very thing she accused me of being: forgettable, irrelevant, and stuck in the past, while everyone else moved on. Comment. What really stands out to me about this journey is the power of quiet dignity. Setting boundaries is not about punishing someone else. It is about honoring yourself. We cannot control how others act, but we still have the power to protect our own peace. Keeping a clear record of your truth is a form of self-care when things get confusing. True healing begins when we stop trying to win an argument and start building a better life for ourselves. Surround yourself with people who bring clarity and support, not chaos and confusion. Remember to be kind to yourself throughout the process, because rebuilding takes time and patience. The greatest victory is not in proving someone else wrong, but in finding your own calm again. I hope you always choose the path that leads to your well-being and self-respect. If you like the stories, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.